Agents! Dr. Babylon doing some crazy shit in town. We need you now. I choose Captain Jack Sparrow. Aloy. Link. And of course, because it is my show, the fourth one, Mario. You aren't Mario. Screw it. Let's go, agents. Go attack Captain Babylon and do some crazy shit. Gonna need to close the door. Hello and welcome to another review here on my channel. Today we're going to look at Agents of Mayhem. Yes indeed. Agents of Mayhem are developed by Volition, the creators of the Red Gorilla series, I think it was, and the Saints Row series. And the funny thing is that Agents of Mayhem are essentially a spin-off of Saints Row, which is a spin-off of Red Gorilla, so if I read correctly, I may have not. It was released in August of 2017 to mixed reviews essentially, but because I really loved the Saints Row 3 and 4, I said why not test it out. And here we are today, reviewing it. So that's essentially everything I want to talk about. Let's jump right into it. In the future, essentially, we are in the futuristic city of Seoul in South Korea, and what I understand of the storyline is that Legion have started to try to take over the Earth, and then our agency called Mayhem are at the moment trying to stop Legion from essentially succeed in taking over the world essentially. And throughout this game you will meet up with 12 different characters essentially that are called agents, and each of them have their own distinct side story or sub story that you will get a little bit of a beginning of essentially in the game, and then you will later on find out a little bit more throughout the game's progression essentially. But overall the storyline is essentially that Dr. Babylon have been essentially assigned to take over Seoul for another organization that I think are called Brimstone, but I can't remember. Sorry for that. But it is essentially a evil organization from a biggest organization that essentially wants to take over the world. And Dr. Babylon are the main bad guy essentially that essentially wants to take over Seoul, but our Agents of Mayhem are essentially trying to stop him. And yeah. When it comes to the storyline, that was a small synopsis essentially of the game, and it isn't that hard to understand for the most part when it comes to the core of the game. Essentially, you have the agents that are trying to stop Legion, led by Dr. Babylon, to take over Seoul, essentially. But overall, the storyline are a little bit on the safe side, I would say. It isn't the most unique one, it isn't the most interesting one, but it is a safe one that feels okay for the most part, in my opinion. The storyline shines a little bit when it comes to the different agents that you're going to play throughout the game, and you get some, as I said previously, some begin origin storylines, essentially setting up the characters, but then they also try to meat, give you a little bit more meat on this character, by giving you more missions that will give you more storyline behind these characters, essentially. But the storylines doesn't really go anywhere in this game, and for the most part the storyline in itself are trying to set up another game, I feel, because it doesn't really give you an ending to any of the sub-stories when it comes to agents and the main storyline, in my opinion. It just feels like a more of a setup for another franchise, which is a little bit sad. But as I said, it is a little bit also on the safe side. It could be a conclusion when it comes to the main storyline, but when it comes to the characters, they are a little bit weak, and because of that, the storyline are just okay, at least for me. One of the main selling points of this game will essentially be the characters. But overall, when it comes to the characters, in my opinion, they aren't that interesting. And that is basically because one of the main selling points about this game will essentially be the 12 agents that you essentially will play throughout the game. But I wouldn't say they are that interesting for the most part. Of course, some of them look interesting and have somewhat interesting characteristics, but they don't really grow you that much as I would have liked, essentially. But the characters that I think are really likable and really fun and interesting will be the lieutenants under Dr. Babylon, essentially. The bad guys that essentially isn't the main bad guy, but they follow him, essentially. They have interesting backstories and they have interesting characteristics, and for most I feel like complete characters, which the 12 others doesn't do, which is the 12 main characters doesn't do, essentially, at least in my opinion. The same goes for Dr. Babylon, which doesn't really feel like a great villain. It is very similar to all the villains and doesn't really, what could you say, he doesn't really do that much different from other characters. So overall I would say the characters are a mixed bag, but overall they are okay, I would say. When it comes to gameplay in Agents of Mayhem, you essentially choose between the 12 characters and choose 3 that you want to play as. And you use these 3 essentially to finish missions, etc, etc. The missions are essentially divided into main missions and side missions as usual, but side missions are essentially part of the story missions, so it is somewhat main mission, but at the same time isn't, because the side mission essentially locks up the different characters that you haven't already gotten for free, which essentially are the 3 main characters that you see at the front of the game cover, essentially. I can't remember all the names, but one of the main ones are Hollywood, essentially, which is a guy with a gun shooting and having a lot of explosions essentially. Then we also have this time the main missions, which essentially goes into more and more about the storyline. The sad thing about all of the missions is that they are very similar in general, essentially. You essentially goes into layers, which essentially are the 50% of the game, and you essentially kill Legion. The rest of the game essentially are some different things, such as killing Legions and hacking. That's about it, mainly about this game. You also get bosses for, yes, of course, but for the most part it is hacking, infiltrating layers of Legion and killing Legion members, essentially. They have the structure to essentially give you enjoyable open world gameplay, but for the most part when it comes to the missions it isn't really that much to do. All of the main missions and side missions essentially are the same when it comes to structure and what you have to do in them. And that is also the same when it comes to the open world part, because everything essentially are the same. You take over layers, you kill Legion, and etc, etc. Of course you have also some smaller parts which essentially are take over recaptures points in the city. You also had to help a seller to gain back from areas in the city, but for the most part it is basically the same. And as I said, the structure there for a great gameplay, but overall it is a little bit boring because it is basically the same throughout the entire game. But the main selling point is the 3 characters that you choose between are enjoyable, but overall it is just, it feels a little bit boring because everything is same, basically the same. The art style of the game are looking somewhat good in my opinion. The environments are interesting, it is futuristic, and I really like futuristic worlds. But for the most part, when it comes to environments, it feels a little bit too much empty when it comes to environments. It isn't that much happening in the world, and that's a little bit sad because it is an open world game and I want stuff to happen in it. You essentially see just people walking around or just driving cars, that is it. You don't see any other things. You may see legions sometimes, but you just shoot them and they're dead, that is it. But when it comes to art style, I really like it. I can't remember what it's called, shade something, but it's a interesting art style that I liked essentially. I think they are a little bit more colorful than they were in the Saints Row series, but it is interesting and colorful. It was beautiful looking for the most part, but sadly when it comes to environments it is a bit empty. But I like the futuristic parts of the game, and yeah, essentially I liked it for the most part. Agents of Mayhem have an okay storyline with for the most part interesting characters, somewhat okay environments and art style, and also but have a little bit on the boring side when it comes to essentially the gameplay, because it is too much of the same. The game are in the middle for the most part, and they have everything that is needed for a great game, but for the most part they just fall on the what this is called finish line essentially. They have everything that is needed for a great game, but they reuse too much of the same thing when it comes to when it comes to essentially missions and gameplay. The storylines, they have great storylines when when the storylines are finished and actually really well done, they are really great. But when they aren't finished and you're left hanging, it isn't that good in my opinion. And also when it comes to environments, it is too empty for my tasting. Even though I like the world, when it comes to the futuristic part, it feels a little bit too empty, and there isn't much to do in this open world game. But overall, this game for the most part is in the middle for me. I liked it for what it was. I did play through it, and I did 100% of the missions, but for the most part it is just a mediocre game for the most part. Agents of Mayhem, we get a final verdict of a 5.1 out of 10. That's all for today folks, watch you next time.